Greetings and welcome to Recentering Black Voices in the Arts. In this program, we will explore the intentional exclusion of Black voices from music, theater, the visual and performing arts, and the emancipatory actions of scholars towards reconciliation. My name is Keenan Colquitt. I'm the program lead for the Diversity Scholars Network, which is a core initiative of the National Center for Institutional Diversity, NCID. The Diversity Scholars Network is a scholarly community committed to advancing understandings of historical and contemporary social issues related to identity, difference, culture, representation, power, oppression, and inequality as they occur and affect individuals, groups, communities, and institutions. We are proud to sponsor this program in collaboration with NCID's Anti-Racism Collaborative, a strategic space for engagement around anti-racism research and scholarship, and part of the Provost Anti-Racism Initiative. On behalf of the Diversity Scholars Network and the Anti-Racism Collaborative, we welcome you. We begin this presentation with a land acknowledgement. The University of Michigan is located on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe people. In 1817, the Three Fires Confederacy made the largest single land transfer to the University of Michigan. This was offered ceremonially as a gift through the treaty at the foot of the rapids. Through these words of acknowledgement, their contemporary and ancestral ties to the land and their contributions to the university are renewed and reaffirmed. Before we begin, I'd like to share a few reminders with you all. Closed captioning is available. Click on the CC icon and select View Subtitle. This session is being recorded and will be available on NCID's website following the session. A transcript will be provided on the website with the event recording. Please submit your questions using the Q&A tool in the Zoom toolbar. Engage in topic online discussion with hashtag NCID anti-racism, or follow us on Twitter using @UMichNCID. Please help us build this Diversity Scholars Network program and other anti-racism collaborative initiatives by completing our post-event survey displayed in your browser immediately after discussion ends. More information about the DSN is available on our website, as well as ARC, the Anti-Racism Collaborative. Now, to our panelists. Dr. Antonio Cuyler is the director of the MA program at the Associate Professor of Arts Administration and the Department of Art Education at Florida State University, and is a visiting associate professor of theater drama at the University of Michigan. Dr. Cuyler is the author of Access, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in Cultural Organizations, Insights from Careers of Executive Opera Managers of Color in the U.S., and editor of the forthcoming volume in June for Arts Management, Cultural Policy, and the African Diaspora. He is also founder of the Cuyler Consulting, LLC, a Black-owned arts consultancy that helps cultural organizations maximize their performance and community relevance through access, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Dr. Kimberly Mack, Associate Professor of African American Literature and Culture at the University of Toledo. Dr. Mack is the author of Fictional Blues, Narrative Self-Invention from Bessie Smith to Jack White. She has written a new book tentatively titled The Untold History of American Rock Criticism, about BIPOC and white women writers who have helped develop American rock criticism and journalism during the 1960s and 70s. And another book, Living Colors Time's Up, part of the Bloomberg's 33 1/3 book series, will be published in 2023. Dr. Joyce Mccall, Assistant Professor of Music Learning and Teaching at Arizona State University. Dr. McCall's research, positioned within the context of frameworks like critical race theory and double consciousness theory, centers on how race, class, and cultural impact educational equity in music education. She also examines how certain pedagogies, such as culturally relevant teaching, influences learning outcomes among racially minoritized populations in the music classroom. And lastly, Dr. Louise Toppin, professor of voice at the University of Michigan. Dr. Toppin is a critically acclaimed operatic, orchestral, oratorio, and recital performer. In addition to serving on the education committee for the Denise Graves Foundation, she is on the boards of Opera Ebony and the Hemp Song Foundation. She is the co-founder and director of George Shirley Vocal Competition and Videmos, promoting African American music, and the founder of the African Diaspora Music Project Research Tool. Thank you all for being with us today. I'm very excited to begin this conversation. And I'd like to start with you, Dr. Cuyler. While I spoke to everyone here prior to this program, you helped me with the initial planning by drafting some language about the topics we're discussing today. You mentioned the importance of beginning the discussion with historical perspectives that address African American or Black voices being intentionally excluded from the arts. Can you provide our audience with some examples of this exclusion you're referring to, and give us some insight into why reflecting on this history is so important?
Thank you for that question, Keenan. First, I'd like to acknowledge my own African ancestry. I am a proud descendant of people of African descent from current or present day Angola, Guinea-Bissau, Liberia, Senegal, and Sierra Leone, who lived full and rich life before their iniquitous kidnapping and enslavement on this land. I'd also like to acknowledge that I'm joining you today from Tallahassee, Florida, which is the traditional lands of the Appalachian and Muskogee Creek Nation, as well as the Miccosukee and Seminole tribes of Florida. And I'd like to start by answering this question with a quote from Alain Locke. He said that it almost passes human understanding how a people can be so despised and yet artistically esteemed, so ostracized and yet a dominant editorial force in American life. And so the type of exclusion that we were talking about in that initial discussion, I want to, frame it first of all from what happened as a result of George Floyd's killing. And for me personally, it is absolutely abhorrent that a Black man had to lose his life in such a public way to open up this Pandora's box of all of the ways in which people, and particularly Black creatives across all art forms, dance, fashion, film, literary arts, music, theater, and visual art were being excluded. And because the Pandora box was open, it kind of created this floodgate of ways in which people had permission to talk about and speak on the ways in which the U.S. creative sector had and continues to exclude and marginalize them to its own detriment. And as a few examples, Shadriel Labouvier, who was the first African-American curator at the Guggenheim, spoke out about the experience that she had being the first African-American curator at the Guggenheim. And what you can see is how the Guggenheim has tried to change itself or remake itself as a result of her sacrifice being the first. Then we see you White American Theater, we saw in dance, Can You Hear Me Now, which the International Association of Blacks in Dance created. And then of course, Terrence Blanchard going to the Metropolitan Opera as the first Black composer to premiere an opera there in an almost 140-year history. And so these are like current events that happened post, Shadria's experience happened in 2019, but from 2019 until now, these are kind of like, things that have happened, but there's a history to these things that came before these incidents. And it's important to reflect on this history because we need to remind ourselves and those who do not identify as Black, what we're capable of achieving artistically and creatively, even amidst the marginalization and oppression. And I'll close by saying, and I often find myself wondering what we could and would achieve if not for barriers, exclusion, and strife. But I'm heartened by some of the changes I'm seeing taking place across the sector today. Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Dr. Mccall, I'll move to you just as a reminder and reminder to myself as well to speak slowly. We have some closed captioners who are moving frantically to keep up with us.
Thank you, and thank you all for having me. It's an honor to be on this panel with such incredible scholars, musicians, artists. So recently, I published a book chapter in the Handbook of Critical Race Theory and Education in December 2021. And the title of that book chapter was Straight No Chaser and Unsung Blues. And in that book chapter, I talked about the many ways in which predominantly white institutions, particularly music education programs across the country, contribute to an unsung blues. And I define that as a collection of voices, particularly Black voices that have yet to be performed, but they're often being performed by those to whom they do not belong. Often these are white people in our programs, in our institutions. And I talk about how, especially in terms of like policies and practices in our music programs, whether it's admission policies or audition policies and practices, that our institutions have found ways, and they know that these are ways in which we keep out Black voices from our institutions, which includes through ACT, SAT scores, in the state of Illinois, where I previously taught at the University of Illinois. I just had a conversation with a few teachers from around the country last night. In Chicago, so most students in CPS do not have access to school music making until the 9th grade. And in the suburbs of Chicago, those students, which are predominantly white, those communities, they start with school music at the age of, grades 4 and 5. And so when we talk about, playing catch up, when we talk about scholarships, when we talk about students being prepared to, or just have the knowledge to negotiate an audition that is already not representative of their background and their culture, that's what I'm talking about. Those things that contribute to an unsung blues already before they reach into the institution. I also speak about how our curriculum is heavily situated in Western art, music, and aesthetic. And most of, if not all, our music, which is Black and of the African diaspora, is often situated as elective. So what does that tell our students? What does that suggest to white people even? Like, our music is less than, when we know that our music and our aesthetics, our art is dope. It is incredible. And we have to push back, and we know the ways in which to confront this, but the question becomes whether or not our institutions are brave enough and honest enough to confront the racist structures that they perpetuate, including my own institution, Arizona State University. I think, I was having a conversation last night with a colleague, and over 80% of the music teachers that we graduate from our programs are white. And many of them lack the skills and disposition to engage other people's children. And so when we talk about erasure, when we talk about annihilation, when we talk about misappropriation and misinformation, these music teachers go out into the world teaching other people's children, not just the Western framework, but teaching this idea that Black music and other music outside of that Western framework is inferior or less important and doesn't deserve the same amount of time or effort or even research that we put into something like the Duraflay or various aspects of the Western paradigm. So those are just a few of those things that I talk about in the book chapter, but I use Thelonious Monk and his music as a metaphor, but not just as a metaphor, but as an example, a cultural artifact, a living cultural artifact that we can use his music and his sound, how he manifested that sound by inviting other people who didn't sound like him to the bandstand to create. And if we use those aspects of the musicians that, like a Nina Simone or Monk or Marvin Gaye, to look at race and racism and to learn lessons from Monk. Like Monk's sound was not created because he played with people who sounded like him. He played with folk who had a totally different aspect in regards to sound. He also played in a very percussive way. He was truly an original. And we have a lot of originals, a lot of kids who are coming into music with incredible skills. They may not engage in the Western notation, but they are originals in their own way. And unfortunately, we don't acknowledge that they have that when they come to our spaces. So I'll just end there, but there are a lot of these examples.
All right, thank you very much. I definitely want to come back to Monk and Nina Simone. Dr. Toppin, to you.
Yes, thank you as well for having me as a part of this panel. And I'm so delighted to be here with my colleagues and to engage with this question. Both of my colleagues have done a beautiful job framing this, and I'm the daughter of a historian of African American history, civil war and Reconstruction. And so I'm always trying to drill down on how did we get here in any situation. And so I started by thinking about African music and how when Westerners heard African music, they didn't know how to engage with it. They didn't know how to notate it because of the complexity. They didn't have a language to engage with it. And so when you talk about the exclusion of something, it started for me at that point with, if you don't know what this is, and instead of learning or embracing or trying to dig into it, instead, because of practices going on in the United States once these Africans became enslaved Africans, you're dismissive of it. So you're already taking these stories and this history, this tradition of African griots who carried the stories of their villages throughout the continent. You've now dismissed all of those narratives and all of the musical practices that go along with it. And then I think about my industry, the classical music world, which Dr. Cuyler has already alluded to. But I think about the fact that the exclusion of Black voices in the classical era begins with what we call the musical canon. And we don't realize it's a bigger thing than we think, that if you decide, and the canon is music that people value. Who are those people who got to value specific music? Well, we see that in the 1800s, you have the rise of music history and music criticism. And so you also have German nationalism that's having its rise. And so we begin to center what is the music that all the rest of us are going to study for hundreds of years on this narrow band from this narrow area that German, Austrian composers and those who are writing this criticism decide that Beethoven, Brahms, the three Bs, Bach, that this is the important music because it becomes our canon. And so everywhere you look, everyone values the music from that narrow thread. Does that mean that I don't value that music? Of course, no, I value it too. But what I recognize is that I read a quote that talked about the canon was not something that cannot be broken. It's just nobody thought about breaking it. We all followed it. We were all trained in that same way. And so what the canon left out, those composers, the German and Austrian composers during World War II, they flee to where? The United States. So they're here, they're influencing what is going on in the music world here. And so those voices are out as well. And we're looking at a narrow band of music by the time we have decided that this is the group of music that's important. So you haven't left space. And then as music evolves from the classical world into the other worlds, but including classical world, who got to decide what music would be published? African Americans were trained as singers as they were enslaved. They were oftentimes sent out to perform as enslaved people when they became free. And they loved classical music. They heard opera, they loved it, they responded to it, they went to perform it, they began to write it, but they weren't in the publishing houses. When the recording industry came along, they weren't in the recording industry. So again, these people whose music wasn't valued as enslaved people in Africa, their artistry and their work was not as valued once they're rising in status in the United States. And then, as Dr. Mccall always also said, our educational system fell right in lockstep and decided to promote the same canon. And so even when you had a moment like in 1932, you have a Florence Price coming in there from Little Rock, Arkansas to Chicago. She is that person who becomes our first internationally recognized African American woman composer. She has success with the Chicago Symphony, which is still in the top 5 orchestras in this country, but she can't get her symphony that is performed by them performed again in her lifetime. So you have these breakthrough people, William Grant Still, Florence Price, William Dawson, they all broke through these bigger glass ceilings. And as Dr. Cuyler said, we're now at the point of the Met doing an opera, but we had opera back in the early 1900s with Scott Joplin writing Treemonisha. Why wasn't that popular? You have a young Black woman who is the heroine in the story talking about education for Black people. This is important for education for Black people. Is that a story that's going to be welcomed and brought into the canon? No, it didn't make it into the canon. And so it's what I think about when we talk about this, it all is that these missing narratives, these perspectives of Black people, by excluding this music, we're leaving out so much of what is American culture and who we are as a society, all American people. That's why it's important for us to get this music and art and drama and history. We have to get it all into the canon or into our educational system. For that reason, we're an incomplete nation. We don't have these stories, so we're incomplete. And I'll stop at that point.
I really appreciate the conversation on canon and placing things that way. It acknowledges that there's something missing. Dr. Mack, finish with you.
Thank you all. I'm also really excited to be here. Thank you for the invitation. So wonderful to be on this panel with such esteemed colleagues. Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about popular music and talk about some of these same issues. I think we'll keep coming back to a lot of these same echoes. I would say that it's really important to think historically about early 20th century and the ways in which we received some of these genre categories in popular music and how artificial they are and how actually they're marketing categories and how in the South, you know, the music that Black and white people were playing, much of the music and much of the instrumentation was the same. But when it came to making money and figuring out how to maximize profits, the recording industry decided to artificially segregate the music. And so you had race labels, you know, this is early 20th century, in the 1920s or so, you had race labels and you had hillbilly labels. And even if the music was more or less the same, you had Black people who ended up on the race labels and white people who ended up on the hillbilly labels. And then you had this split between blues and country, with Black people labeled as blues and white people labeled as country. And this, of course, persisted, and these genre categories became entrenched. And this is one of the reasons why even now, a lot of people view country music as white, even though there have always been Black people playing country music, performing country music, and it has Black origins. And we saw a similar thing happen with rhythm and blues, the original rhythm and blues, which had an artificial distinction from rock and roll. You know, of course, rock and roll is made up of a lot of things: blues, jazz, R&B. But you could listen to songs that sounded more or less the same. But if they're played by a Black artist, it would be R&B. And if they're played by a white artist, it would be rock and roll. And this mattered because of money and access to marketing, access to a broader audience, access to certain kinds of radio airplay. So this absolutely mattered. And then, of course, ultimately, as we move into the 1960s, we have this split between rock and funk. And all of a sudden, inexplicably, rock and roll, which has Black origins, became rock and then became white. And, you know, and again, we had the same thing happen again, where you could hear bands like Parliament Funkadelic or LaBelle, who had features of rock music, but were labeled funk because of the color of their skin. And again, this mattered because of audience and reception and opportunity to have greater exposure and the kinds of airplay that can add up to dollars. So this is something that, again, has a long history. I'm also really interested in canon, in popular music, and it's important. And because this is how we get ideas about what music is, who's at the center of the music, and who matters.
I appreciate you ending that way, especially with the discussions of canon. As I'm listening to the conversation, I think it's funny. I'm a saxophonist, so I play saxophone, and I remember playing Bach on a saxophone and laughing because I'm like, I don't think this was written for me, because I'm doing a lot of hard things here that I shouldn't have to do on the saxophone to make this happen. So the discussions of what is canon, what is seen as the standard, and what is seen as the thing that we uphold and always aspire to is very, very important. Thank you for that. Dr. Mack, I think we'll continue in this conversation with you. I know we recently spoke in a book talk. We had a coffee talk series here, and we discussed your first book, Fictional Blues, Narrative Self-Invention, from Bessie Smith to Jack White, and then your second and upcoming text, focusing in on American rock criticism. And I think this is a good segue to finish up some of the things that you were speaking about. But can you discuss events and individuals in history that embody anti-racism or pro-Black ideologies? I think your text can offer some great insight and clarification into these theories and how they can have an emancipatory effect on what we're discussing.
Yeah, absolutely. So my first book is focused, it makes an argument for the blues as a narrative art through which its makers invent and reinvent themselves using autobiographical fictions. And it's historical and contemporary, and all of the artists and subjects in my book are in conversation with an early idea of 20th century American blues. And I look at people like Bessie Smith and Ma Rainey, who I think are very important examples of artists, you know, Black women who evinced a feminist spirit and who really pushed back against white middle-class heteronormative ideas of femininity, and who performed music and traveled and did things that women were not supposed to do in that time period. And so these women were people who took control of their narratives, who spoke about things that weren't supposed to be spoken about, who talked about sex and sexuality, and who also talked about domestic relationships outside of heteronormative ideas of conventional marriage. And they were pro-Black, but also pro-women. And there's another person who I spend a lot of time with in my book, Big Mama Thornton, who's, I think, a really kind of criminally unsung person and legend in both blues, but also I think a very important early originator of rock and roll, and very important to rock history as well. And she's somebody who is connected to two of the most important songs in the 20th century, Hound Dog and Ball and Chain. And Hound Dog is a song that she didn't write. Lieber and Stoller wrote it, but it was a song that was written for her and with her in mind, with her voice. And she had a sense of ownership over the song because, again, they came to her because they wanted her sound, and she gave them her voice, and she made it her own, and it was successful. Her version of Hound Dog was very successful. But then some years later, Elvis Presley did a version of Hound Dog that was more successful. And again, because he was one of the white artists who was able to do Black music and do it with a white face and have a larger audience as a result, his version overshadowed her version. And his version was a rock and roll song. Her version was an R&B song. And this was something that was difficult for her. This was something that really had a impact on her, was something that she had difficulty kind of getting past because she felt like she was erased from that song. She also wrote Ball and Chain, which is a blues song that she recorded, and it didn't get released, but it was a song that she wrote and was a wonderful song, and she performed it. And then Janice Joplin in the 1960s, who was with Big Brother and the Holding Company, did a version of the song in 1967, and she debuted it at the Monterey Festival, Rock Festival, Pop Festival, and it made her a breakout star. And she became associated with that song throughout her career. And now I do want to say, and on Janice's behalf, she did the right thing and was very clear about where the song came from, and made sure that Big Mama Thornton got royalties. But nonetheless, Big Mama Thornton was erased again in that case. And these two songs became very, very important to rock and roll and rock. And so in the 1970s, Big Mama Thornton started doing something, and this is one of the things that I track in my book that I think is instructive of how a lot of these blues figures were writing and rewriting their own narratives and taking back their power and reclaiming power and agency through these narratives. But she, in the early 1970s, would start to, as she would perform and introduce the songs, she would introduce them as songs that were hers. She would talk about having written Ball and Chain, and it was in every introduction, and she would say it again and again and again, repeating it. And she would talk about Hound Dog as having been her song. Again, for her, composing was not about the ways in which we might look at traditional ideas around composing. She felt very much ownership because of her arrangement, because of her voice, because of her vocal contribution. So she talked about both of these songs as songs that were hers. And she just repeated this a lot in the 70s. And it worked over time. It really got to the point where, Alice Walker wrote a short story called 1955. Impossible to say for sure that it's meant to be Big Mama Thornton and Elvis Presley, but it sure looks like them. And these were things that continue to work towards having people realize that Big Mama Thornton was a force. That Big Mama Thornton was not only important for blues legend, but also was important for rock and roll and rock. And she did this in large part through her own reclaiming, through her narrative, again and again on stage. I wrote this song. This is my song. And so that's somebody who I spent a lot of time with in that book. And then my second book is really doing the stuff that we've been talking about. It's assessing canon. In this case, for my book, it's about music criticism and journalism in the rock realm, and they all fit together. You know, the ways in which the people who were writing and deciding what was legitimate rock and what was legitimate rock criticism and what the legitimate venues were white men, for the most part, making these decisions, and at least making the most noise. And so that became the norm. And of course, they all feed on each other. So if Rolling Stone and Cream are the places where you're going to get your information about, who's the important musician or who the important writers, then you're going to miss out on the people that are writing for Black and Brown publications. I mean, there were writers like Earl Calloway, who was writing about rock in the 70s, and many people don't know who he is, Black writer. There was a teen writer, a lot of people were writing about the Beatles at Black and Brown, Black publications, but people don't really talk about that. And then I also discovered, so my book is, again, it's putting Black writers and writers of color and women at the center when white men have been at the center of rock criticism. And so my book is an archival project where I'm digging in and finding these texts. It's also, of course, involves my own sort of interpretive criticism, but also I'm interviewing a lot of these writers who are still with us. And I've been learning a lot myself. I didn't realize that Cream magazine, in the earliest days, in the late 60s, had two Black writers who were there from the beginning, Jacques and Richard Pinkston. And I did not know they existed until I started working on this project. And, and then Jacques and later Vernon Gibbs, who I had heard of, both for Cream, wrote articles that were extremely important about this idea and this notion of, genre and how racialized it is. And Jacques wrote a piece about Parliament Funkadelic, and Vernon Gibbs wrote a piece about Prince at different times. And they both talked about, these being rockers. These are people doing rock music. And they were both expressing their concerns and anxieties around, will these artists be given the space and the acknowledgement that they are playing rock music, or will racism win out? So these are just the two. And then one more thing I'll just say about the third project I'm doing, which is the 33 and Third book, which is part of Bloomsbury's series on these short books about records or albums. And I'm doing it on Living Color's Time's Up. And Living Color is a Black rock band that extremely important, groundbreaking band in a lot of ways that emerged in the late 1980s. And this is a band that had huge success. I'm doing it not on their first record, Vivid, but on their second record. But this is a band who, I mean, by every measure, was just an amazing, outstanding band that put many white rock bands on their heels because they were incredible. From a musical standpoint, from the depth and profundity of what they were talking about in their songs and their topics and their themes, and the record industry, took them on. They did well. They were received well critically and commercially, and I think people anticipated a wave of Black rock bands that would come, and that didn't happen. It's almost like they did that and the door slammed behind them. So yeah, so anyway, I think all of these things are really important to acknowledge and talk about and think about how genres are fake and artificial, but how they mean something ultimately. And how, the best way to kind of combat this is through telling new narratives. And I'll just make one more quick plug for a podcast that I think is wonderful called All Music is Black Music. And that podcast is doing just that.
Thank you. And I really appreciate the the discussion, cult of personality. All right, I like that. Uh, Dr. Cuyler, like to shift this question, give you opportunity to respond to it. I um, I want to extend the discussion of ideology and discussion to 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 anti-oppression work. And I know this is something that you often address in your writing and your consulting. As founder of the Cuyler Consulting LLC, you help cultural organizations maximize their performance and community relevance through access, diversity, equity, and inclusion. But I'd like you to tell us about creative justice and how it informs the work that you do. I see aspects. I think we can have a link to some things that Dr. Mack just brought up.
Thank you so much for that question. And you know, piggybacking off of my colleague's response, oftentimes I think that history is happening right now. And I also want to add just really quickly to you know, some of the comments that she made, that I think that there are folks that are doing interesting anti-racist, pro-Black work. Garrett McQueen, Quadisha Johnson, Quanice Floyd, Joel Thompson, Arts Administrators of Color Network, the Black Opera Alliance, the Black Administrators of Opera, Black Music Action Coalition, the choreographer Lawrence Jackson, International Association of Blacks in Dance, Denise Saunders Thomas, the Gare Blankenship, the newly installed director of the Smithsonian Museum of African Art. Like, one of the first things that she did was remove the Benin bronzes in the museum, a museum of African art that had, you know, acquired these bronzes in, you know, perhaps in ill-gotten ways, and through her work, really kind of inspired the Smithsonian to think about creating ways of repatriating ill-gotten cultural objects. But so as it relates to creative justice, in 2017, the British scholar Mark Banks coined the term creative justice in his book, Creative Justice, Cultural Industries, Work and Inequality. And the book I'm currently working on, Achieving Creative Justice in the US Creative Sector, aims to contextualize creative justice in the US, supported by the 4 pillars of access, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And now I understand that some historically marginalized people have lots of frustrations with DEI and its multiple iterations, because it really hasn't done much to move us all closer to liberation. But I believe the work hasn't reached its full potential because it has not been anchored in anti-oppression, which is really my aim. And to me, like any ADEI work or JEDI work or DEI or EDEI or any of the machinations, like if the aim is not anti-oppression and thereby liberation, then it's a fraud. And that's just, you know, my personal opinion. And since discovering Banks's work, I've come to understand and define for myself creative justice as the manifestation of all historically discriminated against, marginalized, oppressed, and subjugated peoples living creative and expressive lives on their own terms. In my consulting work, I aim to challenge and assist cultural organizations in becoming anti-oppression organizations and thereby agents of creative justice. And I'm really excited to see some of these cultural organizations doing this work, whether it be in, you know, the orchestral world, the choral industry, opera. You know, I'm really, like I said previously, heartened by some of the ways in which I'm seeing the creative sector still responding to George Floyd's killing, even with all of this counter protest that is like based in white grievance and white appeasement. And as a result, I think the new normal that is emerging as a result of the hydra of crises, right? The COVID-19 pandemic, the racial reckoning, climate change, the hydra, you know, this hydra has presented us with a new way of existing, and I'm optimistic that the creative sector will be transformed, and that what we will get as a result of this will not be the same, and as a result, we will actually deal with and address some of the creative deficits that humanity has suffered as a result of discrimination, oppression, marginalization, and subjugation.
Wow. I really appreciate, I really appreciate a lot of what you, I don't know if I appreciate the hydra, because you cut off a head of a hydra, it just grows back. I need some of the stuff to go away. But I really appreciate the discussions on creative justice. I'm hearing notes of agency, and it seems like capitalism is really playing a role in all of this. So I love the discussion on systems. Dr. Mccall, I've done some reading and some studying of your web page and your blog a while back, and it was a while back, circa 2016, you were discussing business as usual in reference to instance of accountability in the music industry, and how in many in the music profession were responding to unethical and racist statements. And if I have it right, you said it's like we get fired up to make an impact, to change the world, or to shake things up, just to revert back to business as usual. We backslide into silence or passive aggressiveness. And in the words of Jay-Z, it's on to the next one. We keep it moving, but why? So now I know these words seems like a lifetime ago, especially in the time of COVID. It just seems like it was totally another lifetime ago. But I find them relevant to the recent pledges of racial equity and justice in the music industry, post George Floyd's killing. So how can we hold these industries accountable for their pledges of action and move past, as you put it, business as usual and on to the next one?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so just to sort of give some context before my response to the question, that the blog was in response to how the music ed profession were responding to the then president of the National Association for Music Education, Michael Butera. And he made a statement, a very public statement, saying, and I don't want to misquote him, he said, Blacks and Latinos lack the keyboard skills needed for this field. And so people started to burn their membership cards online and do hashtags. And for me, as a Black woman in this field, I was like, it's Monday, welcome, right? Because for Black folk, these cuts of racism happen by the thousands daily. It's just a matter of how we choose to respond to them, or if we choose. And I remember saying, you know, are we gonna keep doing this performative thing, or are we gonna like put the boots and gloves on and get in the muck of it? And I think it goes back to Dr. Cuyler, his words about DEI. Are we gonna continue on with business as usual, which has been historical? I've served on DEI committees. I served at Indiana University for 3 years and did some things at Illinois, and now I'm here at Arizona State. And so I've reached the point of not serving on these committees because I feel like I can do a more effective job on my own and empower others to do the same. So I have been a huge critic of my own profession, so much so a lot of folks see me as a pessimist, which is cool. But at the end of the day, it has been the same thing, performative actions, right? After the killing, the murder of George Floyd and a whole list of Black folk, we've been getting things that we did not ask for, right? We want justice, we want equity, but we get people making paintings on the street that says Black Lives Matter, right? As lovely as Lift Every Voice and Sing is, we did not ask for that to be sung terribly by other people, right? So what we're asking for, and I think we're sort of like reaching a point where we're no longer asking. We are demanding equity. We're demanding justice. And so that's my response to my profession. And after they fired the president of NAFME, they replaced him with a Black woman, right? And so it makes me think about President Obama, and people are going to that, oh, we've reached a post-racial era in music education. No, we have not, because when we look at the racial terrain, the cultural terrain, the educational terrain in our country, it's very much representative of 20 years ago, 40 years ago, 60 years ago. The faces have changed, the players have changed, the system itself has not changed. And so I've been a very big critic of our music programs, of education. We don't want performative, like that doesn't appease us. It doesn't prevent a round, a Glock 9 round from entering my space as a Black woman. And it doesn't prevent the erasure of music, as we discussed earlier in this conversation. So that's, and still, like, my work is still about this accountability piece. When Dr. Martin Luther King gave his speech on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in 1963, that's how he started his speech off, with accountability. He talked about this check that this country had written time and time again through documents and performative measures, and here we are in 2022. So my response to the poorly guided and poorly done DEI work, or JEDI, or whatever they're calling with these cutesy acronyms, my response to that, and I think it is echoed by a lot of racially minoritized folk in our industry, is that we have the opportunity. We've always been building things on our own. It has been the work of our ancestors. We have been innovative. We don't have to continue to sit at a table that seeks to wound us, seeks to prevent toxins and things of this sort. We can move on and build our own. We've been doing it time and time again. Historically Black colleges and universities, prior to the 1890s, we had over 200 of them. Now we have 105. We have our own music, we have our own language, we have our own swag, we have our own culture, and so many things in our country and our society suggest that we don't have those, or that they're obsolete. So the accountability piece, I'm really pushing folks, especially young scholars who are coming after me, to say, you know what, you don't have to sit at this table, but also know that if you choose to sit at this table, you can hold these folks accountable. Your voice is just as powerful as anybody else's. This table was also actually built by your ancestors, right? And it's that to be young, gifted, and Black piece, right? It is Lorraine Hansberry, it is Nina Simone, it is Donny Hathaway, it is Aretha Franklin, it is the Heptones, all these iterations of to be young, gifted, and Black. So it's about accountability, but it's also about telling Black students, Black folk, and other folks of color, like, yo, we've been doing this thing since forever. So you have options. So that's sort of my take on that. And you can move on to the next one. You can be Jay-Z and move on to the next one and do your own thing.
I appreciate you bringing up Dr. Martin Luther King's speech, because for some reason it just keeps getting shortened down to "I have a dream." So I definitely appreciate putting back a mirror, highlighting the fact that it talked about accountability. So that's where we began. So thank you with that. Dr. Toppin, I wanted to give you an opportunity to address this as well. I know this is something I've heard you address in numerous of your interviews on YouTube, so I want to give you the floor here to address it here.
Yes, Dr. McCall really nailed it, and I just want to add a little bit to what she said. And the first thing I always think about is self-care needs to come in there
Mhm.
now because we're weary. We have been doing this, and I'm the oldest of the group here. We've been here. I've seen this. I've done this before, and what I am concerned always about is burnout for those that are doing the work and are called upon time after time after time to continue to do the work. So that's the first piece for me is that we actually sometimes need to step back. And I started a seminar this last summer by saying that I was the only African American in the room. And I said, this needs to be this is not my issue, my problem. This needs to be you looking and examining and learning this what is going on and dismantling this system. I cannot dismantle a system that I didn't create. So that's where I start first. And that, yes, this is about justice. As I'm working with students, I keep reminding them that the direction of an opera singer, or I didn't even take a traditional opera singer's path anyway. I went all off into African American music when nobody knew what I was doing. And so I tell them, if I can go off in left field, I hope you will take this to another layer, another level where you really get what we've been talking about, working on, trying to get happen. You will get this to happen. Changing the music. Somebody asked a question about decolonizing the music. That's a part of a much larger conversation. It is important. It's important to get that in the education system so that young musicians coming up don't think that there is only one way to think about music history. You can teach all of music history using African American music. Hello. You don't have to use the same German music that we started with. So that is a way to get that in there. But there is more to that. It's taking care with the stories. It's taking care to really understand who we are. It's taking care that the conversations are real and that they are difficult. When we talk about our history, that's the whole thing, is that people want to engage a little bit, but you have to go into some really tough spaces having the conversations about this. I would also say that these systems didn't come up quickly. And so that I have said many times that we have to recognize that this is not a sprint. And many people have thought that the last 2 years are all that this has happened. I've been doing this 32 years, not 32. So this is not a sprint, it's a marathon. And we have to be in this for the marathon that it needs to be. And then lastly, nothing speaks louder than showing up, so that as we are able to get some things happening, like if you're able to get the opera company to actually engage with a piece like Terence Blanchard's Fire Shot in My Bones, are there extended events in the community to have real conversations about this? The Met was packed. I actually went to it. It was packed. We have to show up when those moments happen. We have to put our money in there and say we're also a part of this, and that it's like our applause is, it's fine to talk about it, but we also have to show up fully when something actually does happen. We need to support and make sure that our stories are getting in there. But I'll stop. But to me, the accountability piece is very important, and it's hard. It's very hard, and it's long, and it's sustained.
Right. And I really appreciate you bringing in self-care. I really appreciate the nod, if not the big spotlight on the fact that these are not individual issues, these are issues of a system, implying that they have started a long time ago, been perpetuated and created through violence. And now here we are. They're not going to go away easily. I very much appreciate that. And I've heard it talked about as a marathon, but also heard it talked about as a relay race, because you can only go so far before you got to hand it over to someone else. So
Exactly.
I appreciate that. And to move it towards what we do, how we address this, Dr. Cuyler, I'd like to bring you back into this conversation. You got 2 books out. The first is Access, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Cultural Organizations, Insights into the Careers of Executive Opera Managers of Color in the U.S., and your forthcoming book on arts management. I think they offer viable means of redress and intentional exclusion that we're discussing today. And I want to put a big circle around intentional because it's not just something that happened. So it has to be something that we move to make unhappen. So to the heart of it, what are some effective strategies for repair and reconciliation?
You know, in the History of White People by Nell Irvin Painter, she argued that Germany provides a template for repair and reconciliation through Vergangenheitsbewältigung, or coping with one's past based on their treatment of the Jews. And so I like this template and this model. And so, you know, I have to give kudos to the League of American Orchestras for providing, I think, the most brave example in the creative sector from my perspective. After George Floyd's murder, their statement that they put out acknowledged their complicity in a history of anti-Black racism. Like, they put it out there. They owned it. They owned the responsibility for it. And I don't know if it would have happened if it were not for the incident that Dr. Mccall referenced with Michael Butera in 2016, because Jesse Rosen, who was the president of the League of American Orchestras at the time, was also in that setting, who, you know, heard Michael Butera make that comment. And so then they went on to commission a historical report that documented the systemic anti-Black racism in the industry, implicating not only orchestras, but conductors, unions, and audiences in this anti-Black racism. And again, I want to remind everyone that this is to the detriment of the creative sector, right? Like, so in the US, we claim to be capitalists, but there's research that supports that anti-Black racism costs the US economy $16 trillion over 20 years, $946 billion, I think, in terms of higher education. And Hollywood alone every year loses $10 billion as a result of anti-Black racism. So how can you be capitalist if you're willing to leave that kind of money on the table to hold on to the fallacy of white supremacy? So for me, the process must begin with an omission of wrongdoing, then an apology, and a vision of what one will do differently to learn from their mistakes and ensure that it will never happen again. And for me, but at the end of the day, love must lead the way and serve as our light out of this darkness that harms all of us. That's one of the things that I don't often hear enough white people talk about, how they are harmed from this idea of white supremacy, you know, and what it does to them. Like, the fear of losing privilege that you did not earn. What does that do to you psychologically? And I'll stop there.
I love it. I'm definitely gonna have to get with you later on because I've heard some of those statistics before, but I wanna make sure we tweet them out and get that information out later on. So I'll do my homework on that, and I'll drop you a message on it. But Dr. Mccall, you taught a graduate course that focused on power, marginalization, privilege, and music education. And you've written numerous pieces on cultural capital, pedagogy, and culturally responsive teaching. Can you elaborate on culturally responsive teaching and expand how the curriculum can be expanded through these intentional design that re-engage Black voices? You're muted. We had to do it one time. There we go.
My apologies. The class that you're speaking of is a class that I taught at Boston University through their online program. But culturally responsive teaching is a way to engage students and create pathways forward to success in the classroom as well as success outside of the classroom. And that's Dr. Geneva Gay's work out of the University of Wisconsin. No, not Wisconsin, the other W, Washington, Seattle. But I guess in the last few years or so, my work has sort of edged more towards Dr. Gloria Lassing-Billings' work on culturally
Okay.
relevant pedagogy. And Dr. Lassing-Billings just retired maybe in the last 2 years or so from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So culturally relevant pedagogy is supported by 3 principles, right? So academic success, cultural competence, and critical consciousness. So CRP, or culturally relevant pedagogy, positions teachers or instructors in partnership with the student. And that's one of the things that I really like about CRP, is this collaboration between student and teacher to, again, generate avenues of success and challenge oppositional structures in both education and society. So more specifically, CRP, culturally relevant teachers assist students in, 1, developing skills to be successful. These teachers take personal responsibility in connecting students with what they already know, within the classroom content, but also outside of it. They create and foster cooperative environments, and they clarify challenging curriculum. One of the things that CRP also focuses on, or shall I say, embraces, is the fact that students are not penalized for the culture that they bring to that space, right? And oftentimes, well, just not culture, but who they are as a person, how they grew up, where they come from, is celebrated and centralized in the classroom. Oftentimes, Black and Brown students are often written up for some of the most minor details. They're overly policed for their hair. I think we've seen in the news multiple times where Black kids, either the teacher has literally cut their hair in class, or the young man who was on a wrestling team would have been penalized had he not cut his hair. And there's a picture of his coach cutting his locks. And so culturally relevant teachers really work to create and to help students develop cultural competencies where they see themselves in the most positive light. They also reshape the prescribed curriculum. We've talked about curriculum throughout this conversation. When I was a high school band director in Houston, Texas, in that program, we taught in a predominantly Latinx community. So instead of publishing music from places like J.W. Pepper or other large publishing companies, the head band director, Jose Diaz, and in conjunction with myself and another band director, we worked to provide music, actually arrange music that was reflective of how the students saw themselves, the music that they listened to, but also we tapped into the expectations of music in the state of Texas in terms of performance. And for those of us who know about the Texas structure in terms of music education, those expectations are extremely high. So in that, finding ways to use cultural competence as well as critical consciousness, and that's the third pillar, to help students develop a critical consciousness that will, I guess, in turn afford them certain skills and ways to critique a broader world, not just what's happening in the classroom, not just that of curriculum that is often limited and is often not reflective of majority of our students. So through cultural competence and critical consciousness, culturally relevant teachers use those two in tandem to help students achieve high expectations, to achieve academic success. So I do this work, I write about it, but I also teach courses on culturally relevant pedagogy and music education, helping students to one, understand all of the players in this thing. One of the things that a lot of people leave out in culturally relevant pedagogy is the teacher. Like, what are your cultural biases? What are some of the cultural sentiments that you are maintaining in your own teaching that have been historical in education, right? So getting them to see themselves in that space to be critical, but also finding ways to create multiple avenues of success, but also being aware of what is in the community, what is viable, and everything is viable. Using the community as also a classroom to shape outcomes, better outcomes than you would without culturally relevant pedagogy. Oftentimes, folks will say, oh, culturally relevant pedagogy is just good teaching. It is good teaching. But the critique of Dr. Langston Billings, and including myself, is that good teaching doesn't happen with Black kids. Good teaching doesn't happen with a lot of our Latinx students and a lot of other racially minoritized students. So it's about critiquing and changing and transforming these spaces into equitably just spaces of learning. I think, unfortunately, a lot of our music education programs do not have these courses available. They just do not. If we talk about culturally relevant pedagogy in the field at large, it's often within like a week or two in a particular class, and then they move on. I'm currently involved with consulting with a charter school in South Phoenix in shaping curriculum and instruction. The school is positioned to tackle the needs and desires of Black elementary kiddos in South Phoenix. And so the principal, who is also African American, she is very intentional with saying, not just saying, but saying, hey, we need to create a structure, a skeleton or a foundation that supports the education of Black and Brown students. And what does that look like? So I'm really excited to see CRP take form this fall, but also especially in music learning and teaching. So we have opportunities to really disrupt the legitimate power structures in education. But we have to take those opportunities to disrupt that by making conscious choices, but also acknowledging that our spaces are pretty hostile when it comes to educating other people's children. Wow. So I'll just stop there.
No, yeah. I appreciate you bringing in, and I thank you, Dr. Cuyler, for putting in some receipts into the chat. I appreciate that. Appreciate you bringing in Gloria Latson-Billings, speaking to her article, Just Good Teaching. I mean, these are things that the audience can then take and move forward and look up. And to that transition, there's wonderful things that are being done with pedagogy, and I appreciate the conversation on culturally relative, culturally responsive teaching, but there are also tools that we can use within those things. So Dr. Toppin, I'd really like to spend some time with you on this last point and then move into Q&A, because you develop a tool that can be used for these culturally relevant teaching practices.
Thank you. Yes, I did do several tools actually what I've been trying to do is respond to the profession, but also respond to college students and the needs of college students, because one of the things I realized is that there is not a book for African American art song yet on the market for anyone who's teaching the course, which I'm teaching here at Michigan. There's not repertoire published for the students to look at, and there are some other things. There's not ways for them to find easily the repertoire. So if we talk about trying to make a change in just even the repertoire area, if we don't have these tools, how exactly do we do this? Right. And so the first of the tools I actually started was the competition for the George Shirley competition, because I recognized that if we do a competition that's based solely on African American music, but open to students of all ethnicities, and treat it differently than a normal competition. A normal competition would be you come, you sing for maybe 10 minutes, and you go away. You either win money or not. This one instead is a teaching. Because I'm a teacher, I have the students come and I have classes, so they're learning the traditions of African American music. So they're not just coming and going. They are really having a class on spirituals, having a class on art song traditions and history. And so students from all over the world are coming to do this to Michigan, but they're getting that experience. That brought to my mind that there weren't scores for them to learn. So that got my foot a little bit in the door of publishing, recognizing that, well, we can't ask them to do a competition with repertoire of African diaspora composers without providing scores. So that got me into the publishing world, which is not a space that, as African Americans, A, our music is not already there in the classical world at all, in the vocal world, and B, we're not at the table talking to people. So that's what I've spent a lot of time getting to the publishers, so that we now have an access to getting this music published. And then the third is the database that he's talking about, because I recognized if I want people to find what I've spent all these years collecting and finding, I need to put it in a place where people can look for it. So I created the African Diaspora Music Project that was initially tied to the voice competition for people to look for repertoire. And it was assuming that nobody had you didn't have to have prior knowledge of African American music. I wanted it to be a place and a space that people could just come to it, look at the pages, and begin to start seeing the stories by seeing who the composers are, seeing what the music. We have sound clips so that if somebody clicks on a song, they also can hear what this music is that goes with the poetry of James Weldon Johnson or Langston Hughes or non-African American composers. There's poets. There's lots of ways to engage with the tool. We then opened the orchestral part of it this past year in April of 2021. And the League of American Orchestra that Dr. Cuyler spoke about, after their statement, they also came to us to talk about, well, where do we get this music? The song side has about 4,000 songs. The orchestral side already has about 1,500 orchestral pieces that we've loaded in, and we're continuing to research, add to it, but we have already started to engage with a lot of orchestras around this country, bigger ones and smaller ones, with the objective of helping them to do, and all of our conversations are about, is this sustained work that you want to do? We're not really interested in it. We just want to do one concert. We want to work with them through the database. And we have curated already several festivals and concerts in which we are coming in and we talk to them about the sustained, how they are envisioning maybe doing some work this year, but also in 5 years. How will they continue? Are they commissioning new works? Are they planning works around one of the orchestras we're working is planning around the Black composers in their region. As a major city. And so they have already created a plan with us that they're going for several years by focusing on a different composer each year, by bringing the families in, by going into the schools, going into the community, having conversations about what the time of that composer was. So it starts with a musical event, but it is spreading to community events around it so that they can begin to talk about, what is our community been like in the past? What do we want our community to be in the future? And then how do we change what we're all seeing in the world? And so that's what this database is about. And we're continuing to expand it to other instruments, but with the intent that each person that comes to it can begin to go into their own world and look at what they do know and what they don't know. And begin to engage with the musical side of the music of the diaspora.
Wow. That's fantastic. We will be tweeting out information on that later on to make sure that our audiences are aware of these wonderful tools. I appreciate the conversation. This has been fantastic. We're going to move into some of the questions that we received going forward. This is an all play, so love to hear from each and every last one of you as the question relates to something that you're doing or have done. So within conservatories and schools of music, it seems like typical DEI efforts revolve primarily around diversification and diversifying representation within Western classical music. How might we dig a little deeper to actually change hierarchy, racist and paternalistic structures, practices, and assumptions within classical music making? And further, what work needs to take place to actually tip the scales to require students to learn more about the Black or African diaspora and non-Western music practices and epistemologies in the music program? There's some $5 words in that question. I appreciate it. So this is for anyone.
Well, I think some of we started talking about, and Dr. McCall talking about justice and even with the DEI efforts that Dr. Cuyler talked about, it's more than just the word or saying we're doing something for the sake of DEI. It is how do we change these structures? And part of changing the structures is how do we get the people in the room who can change the structure, and really support them being in the room, because even some of the larger organizations, as they are bringing on DEI people, one of the things that concerns me is, and the questions I always ask is, what's the budget? Where's the support staff? It's nothing but a position if you just say, here is a DEI person and they're going to change the world. They can't change the world. They need support. They need finances. They need to have a vision from whatever organization is asking them. So when you bring on a DEI person, what are they being brought on to do, and how to change and respond? I'll let my colleagues answer.
And to me, diversifying the curriculum is like low-hanging fruit. That's like the easiest thing that one can do. But then if we're talking about changing systems, some people think that they kind of fall into this characteristic of white supremacy culture of either or, changing the system or changing the people. We have to change both. And by changing the people, we enable and empower them to put, sticks in the wheel of the system as it turns currently. And so then we have to kind of reverse that direction so it goes the other way.
I agree. And I think we still have to change the low-hanging fruit too. I think that's a part of it, because the students are demanding the change and that piece of it. And I don't want that to be lost, that we're responding to what they're already asking. So we've got to do all three pieces of this.
So yes, and. All right.
Yes, and.
Well, I have one more, and I think we need to go ahead and close up. This has been fantastic. And this is one I think we can all dig into. So what has been the most challenging part of your work, and what has been the aha moment for you?
I guess I'll start. And maybe this might echo everyone else's sentiments here. I guess the most challenging part of this work is knowing that you will not realize the change that you're seeking. You yourself, you will not see that. You're hoping it, right? But also understanding that there's a strong possibility that we may never reach equality. And I think we talked about this in our last meeting of constructing this session here today. I'm very much of racial reality, echoing Derek Bell, is that the equity piece, the justice piece, racism will continue to permeate. I think the question becomes, well, what will racism look like 50 years down the road? What crevices and holes will racism reside? but also using our efforts to embrace this moment of working toward a common goal and using that as a means to create unity. So for me, I think it's like, man, you feel like nothing is changing. And you probably won't even realize the parts that you're hoping to realize. It will be the people who come after you who will be a part of that sort of change that you're hoping for. And that's the tough part about it. It's like you're working. And I think Dr. Toppin mentioned this earlier. It's like, this is not a sprint. This is very much, it's like the show, The Toughest Race, or I forget what it's called. And you you have the tools from your ancestors to do this work, but it's still so hard. And you get worn out and you have to pick and choose which hill you're going to stand on. You have to be strategic. You have to, and still find ways to maintain some sense of self at the end of the day. That's really hard because you're giving yourself to a cause. And sometimes when you get home, you just feel like, man, I don't have anything to give myself for these next 2 hours, let alone another day. So for me, that's been the toughest part of it. But it's just like, you just have to tell yourself that the folks who are coming after you, it's the Shirley Chisholms who set up a pathway for Barack Obama and Kamala Harris. And you just have to be like Shirley Chisholm and a whole bunch of others who came before us.
Dr. Mack, I'll give you the last word.
Yeah, so I want to echo some of what Dr. Mccall just said. It is difficult to realize. I mean, I'm working on these projects in part because I am a believer in the power of narrative to kind of over time change some of these ideas, and history is, this is how we get our history, through these stories, and we believe these stories and they get passed along generation after generation. So I have some hope for, kind of teasing out some of these new narratives and shaping these new ideas around canon that over time it might help, but I won't be here to see if any of that is true. So that is a challenge. But I also just wanted to say one more quick thing. I know I mentioned earlier the All Music is Black Music podcast. It is co-created by the African American Museum in DC and also SiriusXM. And I think it's doing really good work to, again, show that the origins of all of our music, more or less, is Black. And I think it's important to get that out there because still a lot of people don't realize that. And then also I just wanted to say that I have been heartened by, and my aha moment is, a lot of the scholarship in popular music studies has been really done by white men, and we have had a shift, and some things are changing in that regard. And in 2020, we've had all of these really great books come out by Black women specifically. We've had books by Shauna Redman and Daphne Brooks and other folks. And I just think that this is something, this is how we move forward. And even if we don't get to see what this does or what impact this has, I think these are important steps.
Wow. I appreciate that. I'll have to leave it there. We would not be able to see the tree that we are planting or planting, but thank you so much for your time. This has been awesome. I want to thank our panelists for their time. This has been an engaging conversation, and thank you for the work that you're doing to inform knowledge and action to address racism in the arts. I thoroughly enjoyed engaging in this conversation. Thank our NCID event publication team and you for joining us. The conversation today. Please help us by completing a brief anonymous survey that should pop up in your browser after the event ends. We encourage you to continue the conversation with us and to stay tuned in for our future events. You can tweet us at NCID, that's UMISH at NCID, and hashtag NCID anti-racism. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.